Um, okay, well, whenever you are ready.
I'm ready to hear some great stories from David Zentner, our executive director of the UMRI. You have a long history of conservation, and I'd like to hear a little bit about your experience, and I think some others would love to have that too.
Well, thanks, Christine. It's fun to be together to talk about this. I've been privileged to have intersections with both terrific events and issues. Somewhere in my DNA, I received uh, part of my body when I was a little kid said the outdoors is joyful. I'd rather be with the puppies than at Sunday school, watching monarch butterflies, listening to eastern meadowlarks on fence posts. I knew I loved that. And Mom encouraged me to have a butterfly book. I can remember not having one whit of interest in becoming a Cub Scout. Not to knock the Scouts, a great organization, but I didn't want to go to the middle of Aberdeen, South Dakota and have a picnic. I wanted to go outside of Aberdeen with my puppy all alone and hike along the James River and look at mink, muskrat, pheasants cackling. I ran away quite a bit when I was a kid, when I was 5, 6 years old, to just find adventure. My mom would get a call from a farmer to say, I think your son is here, and or would get a call that was annoying. Your son has found a can of paint and he's painting our barn a different color. At 9, 10 years of age, getting over fences and grabbing the Shetland pony by the mane and getting on its back and riding it, pretending I was a cowboy. So I was a mix of adventure. I knew I loved to be outside alone, and I was motivated. Oh, I loved to fish, and had a wild imagination about what huge fish must be under the boat at this very moment. The traditions of the outdoors, as I knew them, hunting and angling, were top notch for me. But also at an early stage was conserving the resource. I didn't know what that word meant, but the resource knocked me out. And I loved water and I loved the wild. So I said enough of that, but that enabled me to be excited when I was a junior high school kid. We call it middle school today. To go to the local Isaac Waltley chapter that my folks belonged to in Clinton, Iowa, and look at fish, we call them cynically somewhat today, mounted animals, cadavers. But I could look at an elk and wonder about where that elk had been. I could look at a duck that was mounted, and my imagination would run wild. Where did that duck fly? What did it see? Was it in Florida in the winter and an alligator tried to grab it while it was on a roosting log? Had it been far enough north, for heaven's sake, to see a polar bear or whales that I was reading about in the Arctic from Hudsonian explorers, the great explorers of the day? That all lit my imagination. And then right after college in Duluth, Minnesota, I learned that an Isaac Walton League chapter was reorganizing, and as Margot and I were invited to a brewery, Fitzger's Brewery, to learn about the Isaac Walton League of America. Well, I already knew about the league because in Clinton, a friendly game warden had given me the opportunity to have my first airplane ride. And we went up in the sky on a cold January Saturday because there'd been a lot of snow. And the chapter had gotten some food for pheasants. And I sat in the back of the airplane, and when the game warden said, "Dave, now," I pushed these bags of food out the airplane window and watched it fall to where pheasants were gathered below. Now that's a discredited approach to carrying birds through the winter these days. But nonetheless, can you imagine how excited I was to be in that airplane with that great game warden, conservation officers, we call them today. I remember him well. He used to check the catfish I caught in the Mississippi River to make sure everything was legal. So it was easy for me having those Clinton, Iowa, Isaac Walton being imprinted with all of that, to go to that meeting with Margot right after college, join the chapter, become active in the chapter, and that led to my hero, Sigurd Olson, his wife Elizabeth, their sons Bob and Sigurd Jr. I came to know them, and I was instructed by them. Elmer L. Anderson, former governor of the great state of Minnesota. Elmer, along with friends, had a vision to establish the first and the only national park in the state of Minnesota, Voyageurs Park. Both Governor Anderson, he was the former governor, he was the regent at the University of Minnesota, and Sigurd Olson illustrated their ability to take unpopular positions, to advocate for them, to not let severe critics, unkind comments, cause them to be unkind in response. But they taught me how to take that kind of criticism, stay on the issue, be brave enough to be different. And that's hard when you're trying to make a living. It's hard to be an advocate when the community you're in may decide that you're an outlier. God bless them for giving me the courage to be who I wanted to be and to advocate for the preservation of what today we call the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness, and to have been a part of establishing Voyageurs National Park in northeastern Minnesota. So those mentors were critical to giving me the courage. For example, I was 19 and never met Sigurd Olson. I was at the University of Minnesota Duluth in my sophomore year, and I came across the book titled The Singing Wilderness, Sigurd F. Olson. Oh, I'd heard of him. I had the audacity to get in the phone and find the phone book and find his number and call him in Ely, Minnesota. And said, "Mr. Olson, my name's Dave Zentner," or something like that, of course. "Where can I catch big lake trout?" And he was extremely hospitable on that telephone call, interested in this brash kid calling him from Duluth, and he gave me some hot spots. And then I read Singing Wilderness, and I could have cried. Maybe I did, because in the words of Sigurd Olson, were the words in my mind, but I wasn't able to put them together in the spiritual way that Sigurd F. Olson put them together for me. He, my reaction to that book was and remains, he's saying what I believe in. He's with me. So great writing, great advocacy is so important in our civilization because it enables people to follow. And I hope I spent much of my life trying to follow the great mentors I've been privileged to be with. Another one was executive director of the Isaac Walt League of America, and I can see his face, and I'm having a senior moment this morning. I'll think of it. He established a relationship on behalf of the Isaac Walt League with the Congress of the United States that was remarkable because they trusted him. They knew that the issue was never so important as the fib, as the move from the value of the truth. And that is such an important lesson. Advocate for what you believe in, but tell the facts. Tell the truth. If you make a mistake, Joe Penfold, that's the name. Joe Penfold, Joe's son, Joe Jr., went on to be in his father's footsteps. But anyway, getting back to Joe, voices like his are needed so badly today in the harsh rhetoric that we're surrounded by, in the irresponsibility in our political system. Legends like Penfold, Olson, Anderson, and beyond are the legs, I think, that we find that we can stand on to recover understanding that none of us have all the answers. None of us are always right. Michael and I are ever so grateful for those intersections. And the way to have intersections with people you come to love is to become engaged. Have the courage to live your life the way you want to live it, not to conform to a corporate job, not to conform to what you think will make your neighbors comfortable or like you. Don't go out of your way to make enemies. But as Tony Dean, another mentor, Tony was my generation. He was an outdoor writer from the state of South Dakota, born in North Dakota. Outdoor writer, media communicator, loved by many people in the Midwest. And Tony had the courage as a communicator who depended upon sponsors for income to take on troubling issues that maybe he might even lose a sponsor or two because of his speaking what he believed in. And Tony said to me one day, he always called me Z, as you know, many people do. He said, Z, I'm as proud of my enemies as I am of my friends. Well, think about that. Tony Dean didn't go out of his way to create enemies. He wasn't an abrupt, insolent kind of a person. But he had the courage, as I just said, the outcome of which is to attract some vitriol from time to time. But he had the courage to do it, to persist. And his reward was to be Tony Dean. You know, the old Frank Sinatra song, I Did It My Way. You might interpret that as being a bit insolent, and maybe Frank was, but the point is well taken. At the end of life, did I do what I believed in? And that's what Tony did. So I cannot say enough about the importance of engagement, overcoming your fear, seeking out your own credibility, your own integrity, never lose either one. Those are all things that help me engage. There are periods of time through all of this where you're not sure you're right. When we created Voyagers Park in Minnesota, we changed some things for some people. People that had land ownership inside the park were removed. People whose families went back 3 or 4 generations, at least 2 or 3 generations. They cared about the park. They were bitter about do-gooders from outside creating a federal presence that would change their lifestyle. They could have lifetime tenancy, but they could not pass their property to their children. There were a number of choices. The reality of being involved in things that do have negative impacts on some in the name of greater community good gives us all pause from time to time. Are we right? Have we been fair? Have we heard the life story of the people being impacted? So it isn't always, at least for me, it wasn't always, that I'm on the right side and the other folk are on the wrong side. We all have a right to our views. We all have a right to be respected. We all have a story that we want others to hear. So that requires us to listen to your story and listen to it to understand why Christine believes what Christine believes. So for me to pretend that every day was a good day, that I always knew I was right, that I didn't have fear, that I didn't have apprehension, would be a mischaracterization of the life that I've lived. But in the aggregate, I'm very proud of what I've tried to do and take pleasure in going to Voyagers National Park. Take pleasure in being in the Boundary Waters canoe area. Take pleasure in floating the canoe at my age down the Namakagon River in Wisconsin, and remember working with Senator Gaylord Nelson in the 60s and the 70s and the Kennedy administration to include the Namakagon River into the St. Croix Wild and Scenic River system. Very proud of those things, to reflect on them. That again was divisive. I had an occasion within the last 2 or 3 years to sit on a bar stool in a little town called Sealy, Wisconsin, with a Namakagon flowing by just yards away from this bar and restaurant I was in called the Sawmill Saloon. And the guy next to me, somehow we got on the subject of the fight to create the St. Croix Wild and Scenic River system. Former Vice President Fritz Mondale was very involved in that as well, and a good friend of mine. And he was complaining about the rabid environmentalists that created that system, took cabins out, did this, the other thing. And I listened to him for 2 or 3 minutes, maybe 5. And I looked at him and said, well, you're sitting next to one of these radical environmentalists. And the guy, I didn't know if he was going to punch me or what, but he looked at me and he said, well, you guys were right. It was the right thing to do. But he wanted to let someone know that you know, it had some negative effects on him, but he also had the capacity to sit back and say, this is a good thing that was done for the greater community. So that's a bit from me on the rivers of life that Dave Zentner and Margot have experienced and what's inspired me.